Hello, everyone. Hello, my fellow ninjas. I'm Jonathan Crow, Director of Community here at Ninja One, and I have with me two very special guests. First of all, look at this gentleman here, showing us up, the King of Style, Kyle Spooner, Director of Product Analysis at Ninja One. Kyle, I know that the rumors were that you had sold out by joining a vendor, and you've gone corporate, and I'm glad to see that you're showing up here to refute those rumors directly.
Absolutely. It is very important to me that I, maintain the current reputation I have of not being a sellout and going to the dark side. But I'm still looking for cookies. I was told there are cookies around, so.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for taking time to join us here for this very important discussion. And then we have really, truly the man of the hour, Zach Kromkowski, co-founder, CEO of Senteon. Zach, thank you so much for taking time and hopping on in here.
Dude, I was so excited when you guys reached out. I mean, our background goes back a little bit towards Kyle's MSP Geek days. We met at the MSP Geek conference. Like, just thrilled to be on a platform with you guys and getting to talk about frameworks, because it's something that, as we'll talk about today, coming up more and more. Vendors are starting to align, MSPs are starting to align, but what the heck is it? Yeah. So really, really excited to be here, guys.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining in for this latest live stream. Carson, always joining, even when it's later in the day for him in Germany. Thank you, Carson. Spencer, Kevin, awesome. As usual, this is being recorded, so if you miss it or have to jump or anything like that, you will get access to the recording afterwards. Second of all, jump in with your comments and your thoughts, hopes, dreams, everything, because as much as we like to present you folks with very smart people who know what they're talking about that you can learn from, we also want to hear from you. You have your own real world expertise and insights, and we definitely want to hear that. And that's you guys sharing those and taking the time to join streams like this in our Discord. You sharing all those insights is really what's made the community super special. So with that, before we dive in, Zach, like you're mentioning, we're going to be talking a lot about CIS, about NIST, these frameworks that are becoming more and more commonplace in terms of the conversation, especially when it comes to security. But why it's important, and it kind of, even beyond the frameworks themselves, I think you and I hit it off because we met at MSP GeekCon back in May, and fantastic event, by the way, Kyle.
And the hosts were incredible. It was super special.
We tried.
Anyone who is who missed out on MSC GeekCon, if you get a chance to, and we want to enable everybody to be able to have a chance to go next year. Once the plans come out for next year, we're really excited to talk about it and get people going. Really great conference. Okay, so that said, when Zach, you and we met each other, we geeked out over endpoint hardening. And you were actually kind of surprised how you found this this marketing community guy who was like actually excited about what you were talking about.
You are one of the most unique people because, Jonathan, you are extroverted. You care about the people, the relationship. And, me, I'm very similar, but my company solely focuses on this concept of hardening, configuration management. And here is Jonathan at Ninja that does a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and all of these pieces. The director of community is now talking to me in depth of the challenges and the market research behind configs and hardening. I was so caught off guard by just the depth that you were willing to go to and were able to go to. I was like, okay, how did Ninja get this guy and how do I steal it? No, I'm kidding.
This is like my one shining moment. This is like you picked like the one wheelhouse that I could actually go into. Prior to Ninja, I was an endpoint security startup, and I really, being at a security startup and selling security, it became very clear to me after reading all the threat reports and doing research into how are attacks actually playing out.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that could really stop attacks and break attack chains is the basic stuff, right? It's configs, it's securing insecure defaults. It's, back in the day it was disabling macros, that sort of thing that was not sexy and that security vendors don't really like to talk about because they like to talk about their solutions. And so I really picked up on that, and that became kind of a thing that I really dove into. And then, so when I met you, you hit on my one shining moment, and the one thing I can actually talk somewhat intelligently about.
I mean, from the praise you got, I'm sure there's plenty more, but I mean, you're spot on. And that's what kind of spawned this webinar mini series that we're talking about doing, because the Verizon DBIR, the, CIS, which we'll talk about today, right? There's so many different attack methods, attack techniques, and things that can be mitigated or reduce your security risk, or reduce your accepted risk without paying for another tool, right? I'm sure Ninja has some automation. Senteon obviously has automation, but the things we're going to talk about today, the things we're going to talk about, next week, next month, and into the future, it's things you don't even need to purchase another platform for. You have built-in GPOs, you have built-in PowerShell. Like, there's things you can do today without even spending $1. It just takes time. Now, of course, having a vendor like Ninja, us, like, to educate and talk about this has its own value. But there's so much stuff, and I love that DFIR. That's something me and you talked about for quite some time on the at MSP Geek, because there's value to understanding how the attacks work and how you can mitigate it without just buying a new shiny tool. And we got to highlight Bob's comment there. That one's too good. So
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's having. Well, anyway, we're gonna get into it, and I definitely want to give you a chance at the end here to talk about how Senteon helps with this, because I think that a lot of people now, they get it intuitively, right? And Kyle, maybe you can jump in here too. Like, everyone knows that they need to sell the idea of security to your clients. In some cases, you have clients who are naturally going to be drawn to, like, yes, we have compliance standards that we have to hit. But a lot of them, you have to make the case. And you've got some great folks like Gary Pika and all the folks over at the I'm blanking on the name of
True Methods and all them. And,
well, no, not True. Yeah, but
Empath.
Yes, Empath, of course, and Write a Boom. All this, great education in terms of selling security. It's always nice to have it not just come from you, the MSP, or the IT person, but to point up to the higher authority, right? And so, yes, it's nice to be able to say, okay, we should apply to NIST standards, to CIS standards, and that can really be your overarching guiding force. But why really is that? And when people get pressed on it, why are these things the ones that you should be paying attention to? And how do you actually practically go about doing that? I find that there's a huge still gulf between those things. Yeah,
I'll jump in. So I'm a recent Ninja hire. So I've spent most of my life in MSP. So I'm deeply familiar with the problems that MSPs face, and frameworks and security is one of them. I remember when backup became the thing, when Datto hit the market with their cloud-based systems, and it's just like, back in 2014, 2015, which seems like millennia ago at this point. And that was the rate. Like, it was like you had education around why you want to have this type of backup over the standard systems and what you needed to do that. And it was, like the 3-2-1 rule was spawned from that, right? 3 copies of your data, 2 different media, one of them offsite. Right. So, and that's easy for an MSP to digest and understand. When you're looking at security and frameworks, that goes out the window. You and I were talking, Zach, what's the NIST? How many different controls NIST has for their checks?
CIS specifically has 153 different safeguards. And if we talk about hardening, just on a Windows OS, about 500 different settings, it becomes too much. So I love the direction you're taking this, and I have some follow-ups on it, because where do you start? But finish that thought.
It's not just, but it's about how it's me. Why? Because I have to understand it to be able to sell it, to be able to pitch it, to be able to do it, right? And there's no 3-2-1 rule for security. It's security in layers, right? That's the general guide on how to be more secure. But, like, what does that even mean? Like, how does what layers do I need to put in place? MFA, sure. Setting up SSO, sure. Lockdown stuff to internal IPs, Sure. Right. There's so many different things you can just do in security. The easiest thing to do is just unplug the network and not go online ever. But
I think that's the direction many MSPs wish we could go, but unfortunately productivity goes down. But I mean, that's the big thing. And when we were doing the pre-interview with you, Kyle, I asked you to put your MSP hat on. And the big thing that I was really getting towards and you emphasized was, we know what we should do. We know who to ask. We know what it is. But ultimately, the answers you gave in that pre-interview boiled down to a single word of defensibility, right? Who's telling you to do this? I'm not just doing this because, in my gut, I think password length should be 10 characters, right? If you do have to defend your choice, how are you going to defend it? So leaning on a CIS, leaning on a NIST that explicitly says, you must configure it to this long. You must reset it every X amount of days. You can't reuse the X amount of passwords, right? That's just password policy. There's a lot of other examples I could go towards. But all of these frameworks, you can't follow all of them. As an MSP, we have to prioritize. And that was another big thing we talked about in the pre-interview. You have to prioritize. If I'm an MSP and I'm targeting, POS systems, retail clients, I'm probably going to need to prioritize the PCI framework, right? So I'm going to prioritize that one. I'm going to meet what that one says. And then if I have extra bandwidth, maybe I do look into another one. But at the end of the day, you're prioritizing. So in this webinar, we chose not to talk about the regulatory frameworks like PCI, HIPAA, and so forth. We did focus in on just CIS and NIST. So let's actually just take a step back and really introduce at the highest level what this is. And I can kind of set the stage for us on this. So CIS, in my opinion, and my own definition, right, is a hands-on guide for security. So they're made up of what's called CIS controls and CIS safeguards and a lot of other pieces to it, but those are the two main. And what the controls are is 18 different steps, we can call them. Literally step 1, step 2 is what they call control 1 and then control 2. And step 1 is literally defining your hardware asset inventory. And then step 2 is software asset inventory. And step 3, data protection. Step 4, secure configurations, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. This is step 4 in what a security framework CIS claims you need to do. What's interesting here is step 7 is vulnerability management. So this concept of security configuration management comes ahead of vulnerability scanning and ahead of vulnerability management, which is just eye-opening. And this goes to what Jonathan said, right? Configs are that point of failure. I mean, you want to add to that? I saw you perk up there, Jonathan. But it's the point of failure.
This kind of jumps ahead a little bit, but I have my own hot takes on this, and that's because it goes back what I was saying, working for a security vendor. Until I've talked to you and seen a few others, there hasn't been a lot of actively selling secure configs. There's secure, like selling vulnerability management, sure. EDR and all these other things. And so that's, I think, a challenge. That's why we don't talk about it as much from vendors leading these conversations. But also when it comes to an MSP going to your client, this isn't always a lot of people don't have a clear framework of how do I charge for this?
Yep. And that charging piece obviously is important because if you are going to do it, there needs to be a return. And that's one piece we can also get into here. But again, going towards, that's CIS at a high level. But what about NIST? Just to kind of make sure we have the explanation so that we can kind of dive deeper into this. NIST is kind of more of the strategic framework, right? It tells you need to achieve a strong password policy. You need to achieve XYZ, right? So it's more of the broader picture of how to manage cybersecurity that CIS really feeds into. So the big thing here, if you are an MSP that works in multiple regulatory spaces, has to follow multiple standards, CIS takes the next step and actually crosswalks their controls, their mappings into other frameworks. That way, by only meeting one framework, aka CIS, you're meeting 100 different ones, or you can attest to 100 different ones, right? And that's the two really big points I want to make sure is understood between CIS and NIST before we really go any farther. And Kyle, I know this was a big driver for you to do a part 1 webinar episode about, what is CIS, because me and Jonathan wanted to go into what is hardening. What's the point of talking about hardening if we don't even know what CIS is, right? So, anything more you want to add on, what is CIS and what is NIST here?
No, I mean, you've covered it pretty well. There's thousands of frameworks out there. Was that XKCD, where it's like, we have one standard. Let's make a standard to rule all standards, and now we have more standards, right? And it's great that we can have this discussion and help educate those who don't fully understand. Like everyone knows CIS and NIST and NEST and PCI and HIPAA and all the other ones that exist. So being able to understand, the framework itself and some of the important ones that connect to everything, I think will help at least set the stage for the future discussions around the endpoint.
Yeah, and I think that Zach, what I appreciate you doing this, and I think a lot of people would probably be looking for, is when you have these, how do you make a decision of which one you're going to prioritize or what you're gravitating towards? So, and I mean, great call out by Glenn here. In Australia, they have the Essential 8.
We got Australia here?
That's right.
Man, international.
It's global. Thank you, Glenn. I have no idea what time it is for you. I think you're calling from the future. I think it's Wednesday for you.
Oh, it's early.
Yeah, but thank you for calling that out. The Essential 8 is awesome. But yeah, you have that. I think the UK has something else too. So, Zach, when you're talking with people, do you direct them to one thing versus the other? I mean, you were just talking about the kind of benefits of CIS.
Yep. So it's about knowing their clientele, and this goes towards the next slide here. We can kind of jump into it. Frameworks don't make money, right? That's in my opinion an absolute myth, because depending on who you're working with and who your clients are, they're going to be required to do certain things, and they're going to be required to pay. It's the cost of doing business. Talking towards the Essential 8, this is actually something I'm like 99% sure that CIS does have a crosswalk towards. So again, in that scenario, I'd say, hey, if you're meeting CIS, you can now leverage, whether it's your own custom reporting, you build out an Excel sheet with all the crosswalks CIS provides. Senteon has some of those crosswalks built in, but now you can prove I'm doing CIS, but this is how CIS fits into Essential 8. And I know you mentioned some of the EU ones. I know the biggest one being talked about right now is DORA. I don't know exactly what it stands for offhand, but DORA is like coming up in all of my EU meetings lately. But that's another big one, and CIS doesn't crosswalk to that yet. So in that scenario, I wouldn't push towards CIS. I'd say, hey, your clientele, your EU is requiring DORA. CIS hasn't done the crosswalk yet. So we're going to need to do, CIS does map to the Essential 8, And they do their best to keep up to date with the NIST CSF. So it looks like they did keep up with, what is that, version 3.0, whatever it is. But and so DORA isn't a crosswalk yet, but that's something that I imagine will be coming. So you got to know who you're working with.
We need to highlight David's comment. That's the one we need to.
Yeah.
DORA, there it is. Yeah, that's what it stands for. Oh, explore. There you go. Love that.
No.
All right. So
I'm gonna have to swipe David's joke there.
I think it's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this was a big thing too with the non-financial ROI. So Kyle, this was a big part of our conversation too, right? I made the case, if you have clients who do require it, the ROI is easy. You bill based on projects. It's easy to prove value. It's the cost of doing business. But what if there isn't a regulatory requirement? What if security isn't something required? Is there any ROI there from your experience?
Yeah. There's the ROI of not having to deal with a security incident, which is a huge ROI, right? So it goes into having to understand what I'm doing, though. Like if as an MSP, and myself and the staff need to understand what controls and what frameworks we're following and why we follow them ultimately. Because if you don't explain why, they're just going to be like, well, because someone said so, and that's just not a reason, especially in security, to do that, right? And it's constantly changing, which is another frustrating point for anyone following any of these guides, is they constantly are updated and they're constantly changing. And what is it? One of the frameworks recommended no longer doing password rotation because it causes a more additional work and additional chance of doing like password 3 and then password 4 whenever those 90 days or 60 days or wherever you have it set hit. So there's a lot of ROI that can be done, especially if you sit down and plan out what that can be. You want to try to do your best to cover as much for little initial work as possible, so that you can harden your endpoints and harden your infrastructure and your networks and all that good stuff.
And it's
I
funny
wondered
on the vendor side, Jonathan, too, with your background in the endpoint security, right? Is there value to, I mean, we say the word hardening, but this also basically means standardizing all of the machines.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to get at. I mean, there is, I'm just going to go back. I mean, this is dating myself. I know Microsoft finally got around to fixing it, but the macro situation, right? Like, I mean, we saw them like inching towards that and then pulling finally, going for it and then having to step back and because of the impact to people's workflows and everything, right? And people were yelling about it. And so you definitely have that risk, and you have to be out to point to some efficiencies. And I think that aside from the ROI of these are like proven to dramatically reduce your risk of suffering in a really business like critical event. I do wonder if there's some efficiency gains from some of these settings that, I don't know. Zach, you probably know better than I do.
So
but
this is like a dream case study that I am working on. So there's two different aspects to this efficiency gain. So there's an efficiency argument to be made on the client experience side, but there's an argument to be made on the MSP efficiency side. So I'll first speak towards the client side. So when Kyle and Jonathan and myself say hardening, we are talking about a lot more settings than just these password ones. We're talking about machine and activity timeout. Don't display search bar in the browser. Don't have automatic executable downloads, right? There's, like I said, on the Chrome browser alone, there's 100 different settings. And on an Edge browser alone, there's 120 different settings. There's so many. And what's interesting is all of these settings don't necessarily relate back to security directly. They might relate to privacy or just distraction mitigation, right? So less things on the screen if it's not necessary. The widgets in the taskbar, for example, right? There can be a security risk there if, a bad actor puts a malicious executable in the widgets, whatever there is in the taskbar, but there's also the distraction factor. So the efficiency gain on the client side is by reducing the amount of things they can see and they can action with, or reducing with user rights assignments, right? We talk about least privilege, and hardening your settings relate to user rights assignments, right? Least privilege, that's Control 5, account management relates right into that. And that's where you can now say, hey, we're getting less inbound tickets because now all of my clients have the same user rights assignments. They're not getting to the areas they're not supposed to. Hence, they're not running into issues because they never got to the wrong area to cause an issue, right? So less inbound tickets is a big case study I'm trying to really prove out through what we're doing. But on top of that, we just talked about it, standardization. Kyle, on the operations side, is automation important to you? Was that valuable whenever you could automate something?
I am in the minority in this discussion. Automation, is the most important thing a business like an MSP can have. It is not a side effect of needing an RMM type tool. I think that automation should be the lifeblood of an MSP. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, we need to drill in on that. You said minority. I would consider that viewpoint the majority. Why did you say minority there?
Because it's not invested into. That's the general aspect. I'm heavily involved in MSP Geek. I've been so for years. I've worked for several MSPs, and the value that most businesses place on automation is not where I think it should be. And because there's not a focus on it, they see as a cost center versus a way to generate additional revenue. And because it's a cost center, they don't invest into it. Whereas if you invested into it, you can reduce the big cost center of the help desk and projects and the entire rest of your business. You can do all kinds of great stuff with automation and someone who knows how to do it very well. And having that type of resource and that type of department inside an MSP, especially as you grow, will allow you to capitalize on things like this. You can build a system to automate some things you like, and then deploy that across your client base.
And why does this sound very familiar to what we were just talking about? It's the same thing. It's very similar. It's seen as a cost center, configuration, import hardening, attack surface reduction, and whatever you want to call it. I think there's a similarity there. It's seen as purely like there's just cost associated with this. It's not ROI generating. And so I think that's a key thing to fight it back against.
God, I could let's just stick on this topic, and if we don't even go to all the slides, that's fine. This is the conversation I like, because this is real, right? This is live on air. These are the real thoughts coming at us in real time, right? You know, I was going to go a direction with Kyle with my statement, and Jonathan kind of pushed it even further, which is awesome. But you have to have that ROI, right? It's viewed as an initial cost center. So, Kyle, I guess circling back to you and your point of view on the operations, right? If all of the endpoints are standardized to have, say, the same configurations, right? You can't have all of your clients across all of your industries have the same software, because there's going to be unique software per industry, right? Whatever system they need, whatever software they need. You can't standardize everything, but you can standardize settings across all of your clients to an extent. There's going to be some settings you can handle, you can't handle. SMB1 might need to be used on one machine, but not the other. But for the most part, you can standardize a lot. Yeah, you can chuckle at SMB1. That is probably the most common finding Senteon has when we go through our learning mode. Yeah, it's a reality we live in. But standardizing all of these settings, if all of the machines were configured almost to the same point, Kyle, would it make that cost investment or that time investment into automation a little bit easier? Like to Jonathan's point with the cost center, would creating automation be faster if each system was set up the same way with the settings?
Potentially. It would depend on the settings, the baseline that you would have, because obviously, you know, as you mentioned, some clients will be able to have, you know, some things, but there is at some point a baseline every single client can have.
Yep.
But I know MSPs who have clients that are still running things like 2003 server and Windows XP and stuff like that, and are, you know, even now Windows 7 is gone. And so at some point, yeah, you know, you can build out automations to cover the majority of your client base, and the more you protect, the more you harden, the less risk you have, right? It reduces that risk, maybe to lower your cybersecurity insurance claims and insurance deductibles and fees and whatnot that come across with that. So there's side effects to being able to do that will generate an ROI, along with, you know, being less testing plans for automation that you deploy.
Yeah. And Jonathan, talk towards Ninja a little bit. I know, I don't know everything that you guys are working on. You guys have your feature update call, I know, coming next week. So that'll be really cool for everyone to see. But on this automation topic, like, I know for Senteon as a vendor, like, automation is our forefront. We want one single click, thousands of things change. Like, automation is our forefront. Is this also something the Ninjas of the world are looking at and trying to make more available?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That's the name of the game, really. The whole tool exists to help make the teams using it more efficient. And so everything we put out there, that's one of the North Stars, really.
That's awesome.
We have like 250 scripts that come out of box.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought this up too. I'll share a link to, there's some that we made available. We had a series last December that was like the Advent calendar, but it was like the PowerShell Advent calendar. And
that sounds disgusting, but that's so creative.
It highlighted like some of the out of box ones, but then also made them pointed to blog posts. So even if you don't use Ninja, you can still have the PowerShell script. And we're going to do that again this year. But a lot of those scripts were made disabling. They were basically, a lot of them were hardening based, and this is like they were some of the most popular ones. And so we definitely see people getting excited about it. And Kyle, just to put a bow on this one, our goal basically is to think about things like, okay, we have these requests, we can serve this in a way of giving folks access to a script. Now we can put it right out of the box and bake it into the product. And then what are some, going a step further, can we even reduce that down to not having to do scripting at all, but managing things through buttons and toggles?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are scripts. Like we have
Correct.
written them and vetted them, which is like there a lot of other places have like a community repository, which is cool and all, but like they're like were tested with us, like which I thought was an interesting aspect.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
I mean, that's a big value because when you get those open source, and there are things out there that claim to be able to do hardening. You know, I've come across it. The open source one that comes to mind is something called Hardening Kitty.
Yep.
It's not the most usable. Maybe you've heard of it. Sounds like Kyle has. Like it relies on GPO to work, and if anyone has ever deployed a GPO policy or deployed an Intune policy and realized a week later it never even took, or a week later it changed and it only took for a few minutes, there's shortcomings to it, which is awesome. You guys kind of hinting towards that toggle feature. Like that's how Senteon does it too, right? There's no PowerShell with what we do because we can't, if we're going to effectively harden, we can't rely on Microsoft mediums, right? Because GPO is GPO, right? We have to become better than Microsoft, better than a non-security company, even though they hold the stature of a security company.
I would say more of their reputation for the mass deployments of the systems that they support in that aspect are extremely difficult and are bound to have problems and issues that they were unexpected. For those who have done coding and development and DevOps stuff, you can probably understand that. But like, try to deploy anything to Microsoft's entire OS base.
Scale, yeah.
And it has to be, it's got to work.
It has to work.
Well, it has to work. Yeah.
Microsoft, it's for your grandma and it's for Apple, or not Apple. It's a horrible example, but it's for your grandma and it's for whatever Fortune 100 company you want to name.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, before you go further, I did launch a poll back and had a few people answer it, and it was just the question to kick things off of how many people are actively trying to comply to either NIST or CIS, and no one said no. Some people said yes, and then I also give the answer of sort of. And some people selected that too. So I'm curious, for those of you who did reply to that poll, thanks for doing that. But if you answered yes and you're here, what are you looking for? Do you have some specific questions that you want to get to Zach for after this deck is over? And then with sort of, what do you mean?
Yeah, what's missing? What would need to be released to take you from sort of to, okay, this is now feasible, right? That is incredible insight for both of us so that we can continuously integrate more automation, make things designed the way you want. So I'm especially curious about that sort of, to see if there's any comments we can highlight on that.
Yeah,
While they're typing, let's put a bow on the ROI side of hardening, right? So, I presented if they're not regulatory compliant. If they are, hardening is required. So specifically, let's shout out CMMC and banking, FFIEC CAT, right? So those two frameworks specifically call out the need and ability to track changes to a baseline. A baseline in this case is the configurations, right? So in that case, you're not doing this, you would be at risk of having a regulatory nightmare, right? And a fine, whatever that is. And then the ROI of, maybe they're not regulatory requirement, maybe they are, but it's the most overused thing. But Kyle actually said it verbatim when I asked him the question. He's like, it's the peace of mind. It lets me sleep at night, right? It's having that in place so that I'm not kept up. So even if it's not a monetary ROI, which as we just discussed, there really is, because standardizing your machines, having hardening in place sets you up for more automation, sets you up for more success. But there's also the non-monetary ROI of just peace of mind. So really want to just put a bow on that one before we went too far.
I think another important aspect that we're kind of glossing over a little bit is the wording, the verbiage we're using. Mm-hmm. We're not using, we're securing your workstations. We're not using, we're securing the endpoints. We're using hardening
good
as the key. Because like, as an MSP, I didn't do sales. I'm not good at it. So understanding that those words mean something, like because when I hear secure, I'm like, cool, I got a layer, I'm great, I can move on with my life. But I hear hardening, I still think that can be broken, right? You think of a rock, you can break a rock, right? So, even regardless of how hard it is, like there was something that it would be harder.
Yep.
So using that verbiage and you're having conversations with your clients and you're demonstrating the need to be able to do some of the configuration editing, and even deploying stuff like MFA and EDR and XDR and MDR and QDR and all the other DRs that exist. Talking about hardening a client's infrastructure, I think is a better way to approach it than securing someone's infrastructure, because I think that gives them a false sense of security when that inevitably happens, as we've all probably been a part of at some point in our lives. I think that helps set the stage of being aware constantly that this is not a backup system. You don't just put it in place and it's done. It's a constantly changing and constant battle between those who want to come in and those you want to push them out. So,
and Kyle, I'll just say, I know you weren't in sales. You said you were bad at it. If you were wearing that suit though back then, I bet you could have sold anything.
I did wear suits. So I only wear suits when I'm when I'm working. I'm going out to visit people and have conversations with people. I work from home, so I generally get to sit in like a t-shirt and shorts, and so I like to dress up occasionally. And hanging out with you guys is one of those rare moments where I feel like I have to at least look the part.
You are going to the MSP Summit tonight, too. So you
don't fool everybody else.
Oh, come on. That was so good. Spoiled everything.
So, Zach, there is one other thing, aspect of this. For the value, the ROI, not necessarily of the end client, but for MSPs out there. I've been talking a lot about differentiation and how that's getting harder and harder to do.
Oh my gosh, this is a good topic.
And how everyone says the same thing, right? We are the best support. We are the fastest to respond. We are the most secure. And so having these standards that you can point to, that takes some of the wiggle room. You can't really fake that, right? Or maybe you can. I don't know.
So now this is actually a great topic. I just had a very similar conversation with Luis Geraldo from ScalePad, and basically we were making the claim, and guys, push back on me if you disagree with this claim, but every MSP has to get to the same baseline. They have to get to the same minimum level of security, and that is what me and him started to call. That is the commodity MSP. Every MSP must do XYZ, otherwise they are less than a commodity and will be left behind, right? They must hit that initial baseline. But what happens after you get to that baseline? How do you differentiate? How do you stand out, right? And what defines that commodity layer? That's up for debate. We didn't define it to an extent, right? But once you get to that defined baseline to where every MSP has to get here or they're left behind, what can you do after that? And the after that point is what's going to make you retain your partners, gain new partners, gain more business, right? That's what's going to happen. So let's say hardening is not part of that commodity baseline. Okay, let's say that's not part of it in your stack, in your vision as you're an MSP owner, right? So I would argue, and again, you guys can push back, I would argue at least probably 70% of MSPs, I'm pulling that number out of the air, have at least a vulnerability scanning tool. They at least have a way to perform scans. Jonathan's already squinting, so maybe my number's a little high, but they at least have some way to do scans. So if you're not performing hardening, that allows a different MSP or someone to go to that end client and say, hey, let me run this scan. And if all of those Windows settings are in the default state, which again, fun fact, about 70 of the 500 settings on a Windows OS will be incorrect. 15% is only correct by default. So if you do nothing to your OS, if you don't change a single setting, it's functional, so why secure it, right? It's working, why change it, right? Don't break it if it's running, right? Anyway, don't fix it if it's not broke, right? That took me so long to remember that phrase. That was so embarrassing. Live on air. That was just sad. Anyway, if you don't do anything to that, when that new MSP comes by and says, hey, let me run the scan, it's free of charge because we know scans are cheap. They're going to see all red and they can say, your MSP is not doing anything. We're going to do that for you, right? Because their commodity level, their baseline level includes hardening, includes configuration management. So in order to not be left behind, the conversation I had with Luis was, you have to rise to that commodity level to do the easy wins. And one of those easy wins, maybe not easy functionally without, Ninja, Senteon, or someone to help, right? But it is easy to the extent that there's a CIS organization that says, do this, do that, do this, do that. It's a very documented process. So what's your guys' take on that? Like commodity personalizing, like, is that fair what I was saying there?
You want to take that one, Kyle?
Sure. Yes, but I think your baseline is quite forgiving.
Okay.
I would say it's more like 10 to 15% would have a tool like that. But I want to point out specifically something you didn't mention in your scenario was the understanding and the expertise in what they're securing and why they secure it. I've had thousands of conversations with vendors who wanted to come into the community, with MSPs, and with just clients in general about stuff such as this. And every time I have this conversation, is we're a people industry, right? People talk to people, people work with people. It's all about people, regardless of what automation, regardless of what tools are available. If you can go in and demonstrate your expertise by asking the client security questions and asking and explaining to them why they exist, they're buying in to what you offer, regardless of what your baseline may be, because they start to trust you. They start to understand that you know what you're talking about, right? Going to a car dealership is not exactly a great experience, right? Because most cars are the same. They might have like a cool infotainment system or the heated seats or whatever, but that's generally about it. Like not a lot of people are going to be like, I want the V8 with turbochargers and all this fancy equipment, right? So if you go in and you demonstrate, hey, what do you guys use for multi-factor authentication, and is it tied to all of your business applications? Stuff. Asking them questions specific to what is in your baseline and what you want it to be will demonstrate that. So if someone does come in and be like, yeah, this is all red, and you ask them, well, why? What does it mean? Why it's red? They're not going to be able to answer that question, because a lot of times they're going in with a tool, scanning it, and they're using it as a sales asset and not an actual understanding of what it means. And I think that, going back to the very beginning of this whole thing, is trying to understand what NIST and CIS are about and why you should implement them and why you should attempt to harden your systems as much as possible, right? So being able to go through that and be able to speak intelligently and confidently in what you're doing is invaluable, because you're not selling at that point. You're just asking questions, but the client is selling themselves on you.
Yeah,
I understand that full picture.
Yeah, I'm going to add and highlight. Kevin's got a couple of great comments. Thanks, Kevin.
That's exactly what I was commenting towards too. I was like, dang, Kevin needs to be a guest.
Yeah, he's come on. You want to come on, Kevin? So he's got, as an MSP, like, you should weigh these risks of taking on regulatory clients. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of, hey, this could be easy. There's a lot of this goes into the whole, we shouldn't get into it here necessarily because that's a whole other conversation, but MSP versus MSSP thing, right? The push to sell more security solutions has caused some people to go over their skis, and if they're being honest, right? And that can fly in some cases, and then others, especially regulatory clients, it won't. You mentioned Zach, CMMC is coming, and so we've got Bobby Guerrera at Axiom is a customer, and he's a great guy. He's been talking about CMC for they've been on that journey for a couple of years now, and they've been very transparent about everything they're doing to go through it, and it's a huge investment for them. But he's making that investment because he sees that as, okay, these regulations really are coming soon, and it's going to help differentiate them because they're one of the few ones that are actually going out and really taking it on seriously. So that goes into Kevin's second comment here. Basically get in front of this stuff before you're required to. You want to be able to have the option to be able to do it at your own pace and to do it well versus really feeling the heat and having to scramble.
You don't need to know it all, right? As an MSP, as an owner, as a a leader in the company, you yourself, you can delegate that to someone that's what I did, because security kept changing too much and my brain was breaking. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna pause here, let stuff settle down a little bit. You could be in charge of keeping up with all the framework changes and stuff like that, and that's okay, right? It's okay to have someone else be that expert, and you bring them in when you need them, right? Don't lie to a client or someone else. Don't say but have an expert, right? That's why you have staff.
Yeah. And the other piece with Kevin's vendor due diligence. So this is a big one, and this is something, and I'm not going to at all say any vendor by name. You can't force me to do that. But there are vendors who have a software. When Senteon turns on the CIS benchmarks, we change 1,000 policies. There's tools out there that no longer work. If you are a vendor and you can't operate on a CIS hardened device, there's something rudimentally wrong with your technical debt in the back end. So that's terrifying, because they're popular solutions. They have a brand. They're not just a startup, right? They're used in a lot of MSPs. And when Senteon comes in, we're like, hey, you use this software. If you harden this setting, it will cause that platform to no longer function. You're going to have to create an exception. Now you're accepting risk that you wouldn't have to, because your security vendor can't handle security settings. So yeah, Kevin, vendor due diligence is huge. The other aspect Kevin talked about was updating. And, I dropped a response comment. It is too much. And Kyle, you mentioned this, right? Delegation, right? Is, as a COO and, depending your role, you may have to consciously ignore some of these frameworks. Like, that's not your lane. You have to make the decision. I need to focus on the automation. I need to focus on this piece, but you can't just ignore it and not tell someone else to care, right? There needs to be someone there handling it. And that's something you emphasize. So I think that's absolutely the right way to look at it. But these things update. So CIS does their best to keep up with the updates and the benchmarks and the new configs, right? They're only as good as their team and their resources. So there is opportunity for your vendors who focus on hardening, who provide those PowerShell scripts, provide whatever automation, right? They can be a little bit faster than CIS sometimes to say, hey, this new CVE directly relates to our new reg key that wasn't historically known to be a vulnerability. Now we need to change this reg key to harden that setting, right? And that's something CIS will take, maybe 3 weeks, 2 months, whatever it is, to catch up. But as vendors, as the people you rely on as a trusted advisor and a trusted partner, we have to step up to say, hey, we're going to take that away from you to where you don't need to keep up with the 1,500 policies we recommend hardening. We're going to say, hey, here's the 1,500. We'll let you know when there's new ones, right? That's something vendors can do to really separate and rise above that commodity baseline as a vendor, right? Being that extra point of truth, right?
So someone in chat was asking about Senteon and common scanning tools, but they have a little twist. Tools are tools, right? Tools are going to give you information. Some tools focus on this aspect, some focus on that aspect, some do a little bit deeper dive than others. It really depends on the tool and if it fits your business. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're bad. I would just say they have their places, right? They wouldn't exist if someone didn't value their propositions in how they do things. Well, that's actually, they probably just exist because someone decided to make one day. I've seen a lot of those too. But there's not like it. Senteon does. Zach's probably biased in this, but what Senteon does, and from what I've seen, as because I was curious, so I asked for a small demo and I got one. Is interesting to say the least, right? You need to evaluate a tool set, a vendor, their knowledge, their expertise on your own. I wouldn't say they're bad, right? It's more of they fit their niche and people will use them for nefarious things. Like I think people were talking about a tool and dialing up the sensitivity to specific things and then using that to scare clients, right? That's a nefarious thing. And that's not necessarily what the tool's designed for. It's designed for you to check stuff and be an educated person to be able to demonstrate this is bad, this is red, this is highlighted, and this is why we want to fix it. But generally, they just be like, this is just a bunch of red stuff. Buy my services.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, yeah, just to clarify, sorry, we're not saying that scanning tools are bad. I think the negative commentary was more on exactly what Kyle was just saying. I think a lot of folks have voiced kind of annoyance with some MSPs who will do that sort of thing. Use them in a way that's just kind of like a scare tactic, basically. And also, point number 2, clarification for Zach. Yes, Zach was saying this in the chat. Senteon is actually not a scanning tool. Like Senteon will do scanning, but actual remediation of
specifically to his, like, he's scanning to be able to fix and update and change his section.
Exactly. So we're very focused on very focused on a scope of vulnerabilities, which is hardening. We're a hardening management platform, not a vulnerability management platform. So just hardening. But no, Kyle, and kudos to Kyle, kudos to both of you just doing this whole webinar. But Kyle, you just shared something huge, right? You just shared, hey, I was curious what Senteon was doing, and I asked for a demo. Kyle's a vendor now, right? Why does Ninja care what Senteon's doing, right? So kudos to just the product team being on this webinar with me, right? There's so much opportunity for both of us to be better together and build this. Hey, Ninja does that, Senteon does that. Here's where it overlaps. Here's where, if you really need to be compliant, maybe you got to go here. If this is just doing your best, maybe you go here, whatever that is, right? This is where I think vendors just have the largest opportunity in the world if you just take the time to learn about the new companies, learn about what's going on in the market, and we can help each other rise our own tides, right? It's not just MSPs rising tides, vendors can be better too, right? And to my previous story again, like, if you have a security solution that can't run on a CIS hardened box, I have reached out to that vendor, right? So I'm not just bashing them in every sales call or anything. Like, I've reached out to them saying, hey, whenever we onboard someone that uses your platform, we break it and we kind of indirectly make you look bad. What do you want to do about that? So just kudos on both of you guys for wanting to do this webinar and talk about a topic that is just becoming hotter and hotter, because there's value to everything that we're doing together.
Well, thank you for coming on too, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Even Dean, who was making fun of me for not having a suit, thanks a lot, Kyle. Zach, let's bring it home. And yeah, perfect. I was gonna say takeaways. What are some actionable things for the folks? Again, keeping maybe that poll in mind, even though not everybody who's watching answered the poll. Some people are, yes, they're actively doing that, but yet they're still here. They want to hear more about what you're talking about. And then the sort ofs, right? And so, yeah, what are some takeaways?
My takeaway is, how do you prioritize ROI? I loved how you introduced, like, automation starts as a cost center, Jonathan, and it does. And, I pushed Kyle. I was like, if everything's configured the same way and everything's the same, does that help streamline automation? Does it make things easier, right? Both of those aspects start as a cost center, right? It does. I mean, that's the reality. It's going to start that way. You're going to invest 120 hours so that then for the next 600 hours of work, it only takes 3 hours, right? That's the power of automation. You invest that heavy upfront, and that's a dream scenario, 600 to 3. Like, holy crap, I'd do that automation in a heartbeat. But that's the scenario, and it's about weighing, what can I do here to make this easier, and just trying to, the operations mindset. I think operations is maybe something that needs to be talked about even more. We'd probably do a webinar on the importance of having a dedicated operations role at an MSP. You'd probably be a pretty good guest for that, Kyle.
We don't have enough time. That'd be like a month-long every day for an hour conversation.
But that's the thing, because it takes someone dedicated to seeing how things flow and seeing how things connect together, to identify the opportunity, justify the opportunity, and then they probably delegate to someone else to say, hey, we need this to do that. And then they figure it out for them, right? So that's a huge takeaway for me. And honestly, just making me reflect on how does Senteon's onboarding process go? Like, I want Kyle to go maybe a little bit deeper in that demo to say, hey, put your operations hat on and tell me what about this onboarding process could be easier for that MSP, right? So there's just a huge value on operations that I think is understated. And we did talk about security, at depth with hardening, and there is a ton of security, right? We talk about the Verizon DBIR, right? There's so much value on the security side. but there is ROI. There is regulatory requirements. There is less inbound tickets. There is quicker ticket triage because now things are configured the same way. So you don't have to troubleshoot 50 GPOs to find the one that's broken because they're all configured the same way. So it's likely, very likely, not a GPO issue. Otherwise, it'd be across the entire enterprise. So there's security, there's ROI, and I do want to give one additional shout out on the insurance side. We didn't go nearly deep enough just because there's so much to hardening in 60-minute window. But I'll give a shout out to DataStream Insurance here. They are kind of taking steps to say, hey, are you doing these hardening measures? And they're actually listing out some of the broader topics, right? Cyber insurance is always, I don't know about always, but is going to be a little bit behind true, documented approval and attestation. But they're starting to ask the questions that relate directly to this webinar. Hardening will get you better premiums and get you approved for cyber insurance. I know that because I'm talking to the people, right? So that's not just hearsay. That is coming and happening already. So, dude, a lot of takeaways, man. This was an awesome 60 minutes.
Yeah, well, to give people a little bit of homework if they want it in terms of other things to check out. I know you've got upcoming presentations here, which is cool, including some of ours, including you mentioned we're going to talk all about Ninja's 6.0. So why is it weird for me to say that? 6.0, our big release that's coming, I think tonight for some customers, and it's gonna be rolling out through the next couple of weeks. So a lot of cool stuff happening at that, and we're doing a webinar all about it in a couple of days. So check that out. But I'm gonna give a shout out to you, Zach, and your LinkedIn. I'm gonna drop the link there so people can connect with you, of course, but also because you do some really cool series. You just wrapped up one about getting a little more actionable, diving into the controls around just Chrome, right? And browser security. And so, and you, I think it was like a 10-part series. You go,
dude, it's the driest webinar series ever. And if you're on this webinar, I know I'm supposed to say configs are sexy, but I can't lie, guys. Configs are not sexy. It's Senteon tries to dress them up and make them pretty, but golly, it's tough to do.
The best part is explaining people that there's additional configurations that you can alter inside of a browser that's outside of the settings page. So that exists.
Chrome settings and Edge settings and Firefox settings you can't configure from the interface of Chrome or from the interface of Edge, Firefox. You have to configure them at the OS level. Does that make sense to anyone on the call?
Absolutely.
It sounds fun, and we promise you it's going to be worth it. So
can we promise sexy, Jonathan? Will it be sexy for anyone?
Well, we'll see.
Just put a suit on.
Just put a suit on and anything will work. But that's the thing with this. And thanks for calling attention to that webinar series because, we do partner with CIS as an organization. So they join our platform. I stream them live. It's all free from my LinkedIn page. But we take 10 to 12 GPOs every single week. We're doing a season on Edge hardening right now. So Chrome was 10 parts. Edge is 12 parts because there's even more setting in Edge, which is just beautiful. So I'm actually booked out until November, and I've been doing this weekly. This is episode 55 coming out this week, tomorrow, actually, with James Beerley.
When you're finished
55
with these,
weeks straight of just talking GPOs.
Everyone should watch all of those every single week. But when you're done, can you come back on and do it all? Can it be like a speed run challenge? Can you do them all in like...
Ooh, can I give a shout out to our friends over at Empath? I am working with them to do a little bit of module training, how to secure RDP with settings. Fun fact, did you know there's 67 different settings that relate to RDP other than just turning it on and off? 67, guys, and that's RDP. How many of us on this call RDP? Have you looked at the 67 settings? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's still, I don't know Ninja enough to say, is that not RDP? I don't know, but, but there's so much to it. So shout out to the Empath guys for helping me extend that platform. Shout out to Ninja for helping me bring more attention towards hardening. And I can't wait to hear about this 6.0. I did drop the link in the YouTube chat too.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. And, here we are. We're at time. We're going to do.
I want to go through my recommendations.
Oh, my bad. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. If you are the security expert at your MSP, and you're not familiar with NIST or CIS, look at them. Just peruse through the documents. I still have the CSF policy terms bookmarked, which downloads a PDF for NIST. Look at them, understand them. If you have delegated that to someone else, go ask them questions about it to see how much they are aware of it, and to see where you may be lacking. That might be helping you be a little bit more hardened in your aspect when you're on the internet.
Amazing. Yeah, don't just set it and forget it, right? This is a continuous process. But Zach, thank you so much for taking the time. Kyle, thank you too. And everybody, stay safe out there. We'll be back
hardened like a ninja.
That's right. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another stream. We'll be back on Thursday with more. And Zach will be doing more control LinkedIn videos through the end of the year.
Hopefully some more with you guys.